3 decades before the United States built its first railroad, China's rulers were issuing paper money and coordinating a vast internal market that generated 1/3 of the world's economic output. The popular narrative suggests China's rise was sudden or inevitable. But history tells a different story. Cycles of dominance, rupture, and reinvention. How did a civilization repeatedly battered by war and humiliation rebuild its status as an economic superpower, and what truly set its trajectory apart from the rest of the world? To understand, we must go back to where China's economic journey began. In the heart of Song Dynasty China, money changed hands in ways the rest of the world could scarcely imagine. By the early 12th century, government-run workshops in cities like Chengdu and Hangzhou were printing paper notes long before Europe's first experiments with bank bills. These Song banknotes, known as jiaozi and later huizi, circulated alongside copper cash and silver, fueling a level of commercial exchange that set China apart. Each note represented more than convenience. It was a promise backed by the state, redeemable for coins or goods, and accepted across hundreds of miles. At its peak, the Hangzhou printing house alone employed over 1,000 workers daily, turning out a steady stream of bills that merchants and officials alike trusted for large transactions. But a sophisticated monetary system meant little without the arteries to move goods and tax revenue efficiently. Here, the Grand Canal stood as a marvel of both engineering and statecraft. Stretching over 1,000 miles, it linked the grain-rich south to northern capitals like Kaifeng and later Beijing. Song-era engineers introduced the pound lock at Zhenzhou, a device that allowed boats to pass between different water levels with remarkable ease. According to the scientist Shen Kuo, these locks saved the labor of about 500 men each year, translating into massive cost reductions and faster transport. The effect rippled through the economy. Grain shipments arrived reliably, markets stayed supplied, and officials could coordinate food security over vast distances. State treasurers and canal engineers became quiet architects of prosperity. By reducing freight costs and speeding up delivery, they helped knit together a market that reached from the Yangtze Delta to the Yellow River Plain. The Song government's ability to mobilize tax revenue, issue trusted paper notes, and maintain the flow of goods through its waterways supported a scale of internal commerce unmatched elsewhere. These intertwined systems, monetary innovation and physical connectivity, laid the groundwork for China's enduring economic integration, shaping debates about fiscal control and market reach that would echo for centuries. Across China's river valleys and terraced hillsides, the rhythm of planting and harvest shaped daily life for centuries. Wet rice cultivation, perfected over generations, allowed farmers to coax 2 or even 3 crops a year from the same fields. Intricate irrigation networks, including ditches, weirs, and hand-built canals, channeled water from mountain streams to distant paddies, sustaining a rural population larger than that of any other country in the world by the Song dynasty. In Jiangnan and the Yangtze Delta, multi-cropping and fish and rice systems kept fields productive and granaries full, even as cities swelled and new towns sprang up along the waterways. But the story of China's economic might was not written in silk alone. Rural households spun silk from mulberry-fed silkworms, weaving shimmering bolts that traveled far beyond village markets. Silk guilds organized production in places like Suzhou and Hangzhou, where master weavers and dyers pooled their skills to fill imperial quotas and merchant orders alike. The most prized silks, delicate gauzes, brocades, and embroidered robes became coveted exports along the Silk Road, exchanged for horses, spices, and silver. Porcelain, too, carried China's name across continents. In Jingdezhen, thousands of kilns fired day and night, their flames visible for miles. Craftsmen shaped and glazed bowls, vases, and dishes with a precision unmatched anywhere else. By the Ming era, Jingdezhen's annual output was counted in the millions of pieces, with blue and white wares reaching the tables of Ottoman sultans, Mughal emperors, and European aristocrats. Merchant caravans and ships ferried these goods from inland workshops to port cities, where brokers negotiated prices in strings of cash or bars of silver. This dense web of agriculture and craft production supported a population that, by 1000 CE, may have reached 100 million, more than all of Europe at the time. Each household, whether tending rice paddies or firing porcelain, formed part of a larger network that linked countryside to city and city to the wider world. The skills of peasant engineers and artisan merchants, honed over generations, provided not just food and wealth, but the technical and organizational base for later mobilization. China's ability to feed itself, support urban growth, and supply distant markets rested on these deep-rooted systems of labor, knowledge, and exchange. Long before the first European factories, Chinese fields and workshops were already shaping the contours of global trade. By the early 19th century, China's population had soared to nearly 400 million, more than a third of all humanity at the time. This extraordinary scale rested on centuries of agricultural innovation and internal commerce, but it also brought mounting strain. In the crowded villages of the North China Plain and the river valleys of the South, land was divided and subdivided with each generation. Many families tilled plots barely large enough to sustain themselves, and tenancy became widespread as landless peasants sought work wherever they could. Grain surpluses that once fed growing cities now struggled to keep pace with mouths to feed, leaving little margin for disaster. At the heart of the state stood the imperial bureaucracy, a vast apparatus built on the civil service examination system. Scholar officials, selected through grueling tests on Confucian classics, managed tax collection, granaries, and local administration. While this system provided a degree of stability and meritocracy unmatched in much of the world, it also fostered conservatism. The exam curriculum prized literary mastery and moral rectitude over technical or economic innovation. Ambitious young men spent years memorizing ancient texts, hoping for a government post, while practical knowledge in fields like engineering or finance was often overlooked. Bureaucratic inertia became a growing burden. As corruption crept into the ranks and the cost of maintaining the state apparatus ballooned, local officials faced impossible choices between enforcing tax quotas and maintaining social peace. The immense scale of the empire made communication slow and reform difficult. Disaster relief and public works projects, once sources of pride, became harder to coordinate as resources stretched thin. For ordinary people, the consequences were felt in shrinking harvests, rising rents, and periodic famine. Peasant uprisings flared in regions where hardship was most acute, testing the limits of imperial control. The state's ability to adapt was hampered by its own traditions. What had once been a source of strength now threatened to become a liability. As population pressure mounted and the machinery of governance slowed, the foundations of China's economic order grew fragile, long before foreign powers forced their way onto its shores. In 1839, as British opium ships anchored off the Chinese coast, Commissioner Lin Zexu faced an impossible task. The Qing treasury depended on silver, but opium imports were draining it at an alarming rate. In the early 1820s, China lost about 2 million ounces of silver each year. By the early 1830s, that figure had soared past 9 million. Silver, the backbone of tax payments and state salaries, flowed out of the country to pay for opium grown in British India and smuggled into Chinese ports. The monetary contraction that followed hit the countryside first. Grain prices swung wildly, interest rates climbed, and local officials struggled to fund relief or maintain order. When the First Opium War broke out, the conflict was not just about sovereignty, it was about the very means by which the state could function. Qing negotiators, facing British gunboats and a mounting fiscal crisis, signed the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842. The treaty capped tariffs at a fixed 5%, stripping China of control over its own customs revenue. 5 ports, Canton, Amoy, Fuzhou, Ningpo, and Shanghai, were thrown open to foreign traders. British and soon after French and American customs officers took charge of collecting duties, remitting only a portion to Beijing after settling foreign claims. For local customs officers and merchants, the change was immediate. British customs diaries from Shanghai in the 1850s describe a surge in foreign goods, especially opium and textiles, flooding the markets. Chinese merchants lost bargaining power as tariff protections vanished. The Imperial Maritime Customs Service, founded in 1854 and run largely by foreigners, became the main channel for fiscal revenue. Yet the Qing government saw less and less of each tael collected. Indemnities and military spending drained what remained. This fiscal hollowing was not abstract. With customs revenue under foreign oversight and silver reserves shrinking, the Qing state struggled to pay soldiers, fund public works, or suppress uprisings. The erosion of tariff autonomy meant the empire could neither protect its industries nor finance modernization. Every shipment of opium, every customs ledger signed by a foreign officer, deepened China's economic subordination. The legacy of this fiscal defeat would haunt reformers and revolutionaries alike, shaping a lasting obsession with sovereignty. In the early years of the People's Republic, the countryside became the first battleground for economic reconstruction. Land reform swept across rural China from 1949 to 1953 as local cadres organized meetings in villages from Shandong to Sichuan. Landlords' holdings, often more than half the arable land in a given area, were confiscated and redistributed to millions of landless and tenant farmers. By official counts, over 300 million peasants received new plots, breaking a centuries-old hierarchy and fueling a sense of new possibility. In the wake of redistribution, rural cadres coordinated the construction of irrigation ditches, terraced hillsides, and new village roads, laying a foundation for future growth. With the countryside transformed, attention turned to heavy industry. The first 5-year plan, launched in 1953, drew on Soviet blueprints and technical advisors. Soviet engineers arrived in cities like Anshan and Wuhan, helping design sprawling steel complexes and machinery plants. New blast furnaces rose above the skyline, while teams of Chinese workers trained alongside their Soviet counterparts. Steel output, a key measure of national strength, jumped from 1.3 million tons in 1952 to 5.2 million tons by 1957. Machine building, chemicals, and coal production also surged, creating a new industrial core in the northeast and interior provinces. This period saw the rise of a generation of factory workers and technical cadres. many recruited from rural backgrounds. Their labor and expertise formed the backbone of China's industrial system for decades to come. While consumer goods remained scarce and living standards modest, the physical and human assets built in these years would later serve as critical leverage for reform and expansion. In 1958, Mao Zedong launched the Great Leap Forward, a campaign to transform China's economy through mass mobilization and rapid industrial change. Rural families were organized into people's communes, their land and tools pooled for collective farming. In villages across the country, backyard furnaces sprang up overnight. Farmers, teachers, and even children worked around the clock, melting down scrap metal in hopes of boosting steel production. Official reports sent up the chain boasted record harvests and soaring output. In reality, fields went untended as labor shifted from crops to furnaces, and local cadres, pressured to meet inflated quotas, exaggerated yields far beyond what the land produced. The consequences were devastating. Grain requisitioned by the state left little for rural households, and what remained was often spoiled or missing. By 1959, the first signs of hunger appeared in provinces like Anhui and Henan. Over the next 3 years, famine swept through the countryside. Families sold their possessions, foraged for wild roots, and watched helplessly as children and elders wasted away. Scholars estimate that between 15 and 30 million people died from starvation and related causes, the largest famine in human history not caused by war. In the aftermath, survivors told of empty villages and silent fields. The promise of rapid industrialization had given way to loss on a scale few could comprehend. For many in rural China, the Great Leap Forward was not just a failed policy, but a wound that shaped memories for generations. The limits of mass mobilization and the cost of ignoring reality became impossible to deny, setting the stage for a turn toward pragmatism in the decades ahead. Deep in the mountains and valleys of China's interior, the 1960s and the 1970s saw a quiet transformation. Factories, power plants, and railways rose not along the bustling coast, but in remote provinces like Sichuan, Shanxi, and Guizhou. This was the Third Front, a vast program to build industry far from foreign threats, scattering technical talent and heavy machinery across the heartland. Engineers from Beijing and Shanghai packed their lives into crates and boarded trains bound for places many had never seen, setting up steel mills and chemical plants on the frontiers of China's mapped economy. The logic was strategic, and the effect was lasting. By 1978, more than 1,100 large and medium-sized factories dotted the interior, connected by thousands of kilometers of new rail lines. Beyond concrete and steel, the Mao era remade China's human landscape. Millions of rural teachers, doctors, and literacy workers fanned out to villages that had never seen a school or clinic. By the late 1970s, adult literacy had climbed from less than 20% before 1949 to over 65%. Rural health campaigns brought basic care to the countryside, cutting infant mortality and raising life expectancy. Village clinics multiplied. By 1976, there were more than 1 million barefoot doctors offering vaccinations and first aid in even the most isolated hamlets. These investments in people and infrastructure did not erase the scars of famine or upheaval, but they left behind a foundation, a generation of skilled workers, a network of inland industries, and a population healthier and better educated than at any point in Chinese history. When the era of reform began, These assets, steel plants in the mountains, literacy in the fields, and rail lines stretching west, became the raw material for China's next transformation. In December 1978, senior leaders gathered in Beijing for a meeting that would quietly reset the country's direction. Official party documents from the Third Plenum of the 11th Central Committee replaced the language of class struggle with a new priority: economic modernization. Deng Xiaoping, recently restored to power, urged his colleagues to be practical, not ideological. He famously said it did not matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. That line began to circulate among cadres and local officials, hinting at a new kind of flexibility. Hundreds of miles from the capital, in the rural village of Xiaogang in Anhui province, a group of 18 farmers made a decision that would ripple far beyond their fields. For years, hunger had stalked the village, despite relentless work in the collective. That winter, the men gathered after dark in a mud-walled house, passing around a single sheet of paper. Each household agreed to secretly divide the communal land into individual plots. Every family would meet its state quota, but keep any surplus. They hid the contract in a bamboo tube wedged under the roof, knowing discovery could mean prison or worse. By the following harvest, Xiaogang's grain output had more than doubled. For the first time in memory, children went to bed with full stomachs. Word spread quickly, first to neighboring villages, then to county officials. Rather than punish the farmers, local cadres, themselves under pressure to improve results, quietly protected the experiment. Reports filtered upward, and reform-minded policymakers took notice. The Xiaogang Pact was not an isolated act of defiance, but a signal that change could begin from the ground up. As Deng and his allies debated how far to go, stories from villages like Xiaogang became evidence that practical adjustments, tested locally, then scaled, could work where grand campaigns had failed. The household responsibility system, once a secret, soon became policy across the countryside. In the fields of Anhui, the seeds of China's transformation were already taking root. Inside the halls of Beijing's leadership compounds in these early 1980s, China's most senior officials argued over the future of the economy. Deng Xiaoping pushed for bolder experiments, but not everyone agreed on how far or how fast to go. Chen Yun, one of the party's most respected economic planners, offered a metaphor that would shape the debate for years: the birdcage economy. In Chen's words, the market was like a bird, capable of energy and flight, but it needed the boundaries of a cage, or else it would fly away and create chaos. The cage, he insisted, had to be big enough to let the bird move, but not so large that it became uncontrollable. Meeting transcripts and memoirs from this period reveal intense exchanges. Chen Yun, drawing on his experience managing wartime supply lines and post-revolution finance, warned of the dangers of inflation, speculation, and social instability if the market was allowed to run free. He argued for strict controls, let localities and enterprises test reforms, but always within limits set by the central plan. Deng, along with reformers like Zhao Ziyang and Hu Yaobang, countered that China could not afford to remain isolated. They pressed for larger-scale experiments, especially along the coast, to attract foreign investment and technology. The Politburo's minutes from 1979 to 1982, later echoed in Chen Yun's published recollections, show this was not a simple clash between old and new. Both sides understood the need for change after years of stagnation and famine. The real question was how to balance risk and reward. Chen's birdcage metaphor became shorthand for a compromise. Allow the market to operate, but always with the plan as a safety net. This cautious approach set the stage for the creation of special economic zones, spaces where the bird could test its wings, but only within carefully drawn boundaries. The result was a model that combined experimentation with oversight, shaping the character of China's reforms for decades to come. In 1980, 4 coastal outposts, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Xiamen, were carved out as special economic zones. On paper, these were modest experiments. In practice, they became engines of transformation. The central government granted these zones powers unheard of elsewhere. Foreign companies could invest directly, keep profits, and sign joint ventures with local partners. Tax holidays and low tariffs lured capital from across the border, especially from Hong Kong, where investors like Henry Fok saw opportunity in proximity and political ties. Shenzhen, once a cluster of fishing villages with fewer than 30,000 residents, was the boldest bet. Local officials, led by planners who had studied both Soviet blueprints and Hong Kong's freewheeling markets, set out to build a city from scratch. They negotiated land deals, issued construction permits overnight, and courted overseas Chinese with promises of protection and profit. Factories rose quickly on former rice fields. By 1985, Shenzhen's population had soared past 200,000, and the skyline bristled with cranes and unfinished towers. Business memoirs and government records from the early years tell of long days spent hammering out joint venture contracts, often in borrowed offices or makeshift hotels. Hong Kong tycoons brought not just money, but export contacts, management systems, and a culture of speed. In return, mainland authorities offered land leases, infrastructure, and a degree of legal certainty rare in the rest of China. The state kept a tight grip on the experiment. Party committees monitored every deal, and key sectors, banking, energy, communications, remained under state ownership. But within the boundaries of the zones, the rules bent. The early rush of capital and technology proved contagious. By the mid-1980s, the special economic zones were drawing attention from Japanese, American, and European firms. The success of these enclaves was not a retreat from socialism, but a calculated opening, inviting the world in on China's terms to test what could be gained without ceding political control. Across China's provinces, the single greatest movement of people in modern history began to reshape the country's social fabric. By the middle of the 2010s, nearly 250 million people, more than the population of Western Europe, were living and working away from their official place of registration. Most were rural migrants drawn to the booming factories and construction sites of coastal cities, seeking wages that could double or triple what they might earn at home. In cities like Shenzhen, migrant workers filled assembly lines and built skyscrapers, yet their lives remained circumscribed by the hukou, the household registration system. Without local hukou, millions found themselves excluded from public school, subsidized housing, and urban health insurance. For many, this meant long hours in crowded dormitories, sending remittances home while raising children in distant villages. Women made up a rising share of this workforce, often leaving rural Sichuan or Henan in their teens or 20s. Their stories tell of new autonomy, delaying marriage and saving for education, but also of risk, unstable contracts, wage arrears, and little recourse in disputes. Two workers on the same factory line could earn very different wages, not because of skill, but because one held an urban hukou and the other did not. The scale of migration fueled China's export engine, but it also deepened divides. By the 2000s, average incomes in Shanghai or Shenzhen were 2 to 3 times those in interior provinces like Gansu or Guizhou. Nationally, China's Gini coefficient, a measure of inequality, rose from around 0.3 in the early reform years to nearly 0.48 by the middle of the 2000s, putting it among the highest in Asia. The prosperity of the coast was built on the labor of those who remained outsiders, creating a society where opportunity and hardship traveled the same road. On the outskirts of China's cities, a quiet financial experiment has been unfolding for decades. Local government financing vehicles operate as arm's-length firms, owned by municipal officials, but off the books. Their job is to borrow money and to build roads, subways, industrial parks, and stadiums. To fund these projects, they pledge land use rights as collateral, drawing on the one asset local governments can reliably monetize. As land values soared in the 2000s and the 2010s, this model unlocked a torrent of credit. By 2023, the stock of bonds issued by these vehicles had climbed past 35 trillion yuan, about $5 trillion, while broader estimates put hidden local debt at 2/3 of China's GDP or more. The system depends on continuous construction and rising land sales. Developers, flush with cheap loans, bid for parcels at auction. That fuels a cycle. Local governments reap revenue, these vehicles repay old debts, and the next round of building begins. At its peak, property and related sectors accounted for as much as a quarter of China's GDP. For households, home ownership became both a symbol of security and the main store of wealth. Over 60% of family assets are tied to real estate. When the property market cooled, the cracks appeared. Evergrande, once China's largest developer, defaulted on over $19 billion in offshore bonds in late 2021, with total liabilities near $300 billion. Dozens of other firms followed. As land auctions stalled and housing sales slumped, local government financing vehicles struggled to service debts, exposing the fragile link between local finance and property demand. Municipal officials, once celebrated for rapid growth, now face mounting pressure from creditors and Beijing alike. The risk is not just financial loss, but the unraveling of a model that underpinned urban expansion for a generation. Urban skies thick with haze became a symbol of both progress and cost. In July 2012, thousands of students and residents filled the streets of Xiaoping in Sichuan, protesting a planned molybdenum copper plant. For days, they faced riot police and tear gas, their demands echoing across social media despite censorship. The project was canceled within 48 hours, a rare retreat by local officials, and a sign that environmental limits could no longer be ignored, even in the name of growth. That year alone, Chinese non-governmental organizations tracked over 100 major pollution protests, reflecting a new assertiveness among urban youth and a public increasingly unwilling to accept unchecked industrialization. Demographic pressures add another layer of constraint. China's working-age population peaked at just over 1 billion in 2013. Since then, the labor force has shrunk by millions each year. The total fertility rate fell to 1.09 in 2022, far below replacement. Births have halved since 2016, and the number of migrant workers, once the engine of manufacturing, has begun to decline. With the population aging and the share of elderly rising, the dependency ratio is set to climb rapidly. straining pensions and public services. Policy responses, from the three-child campaign to proposals for later retirement, have yet to reverse the trend. External headwinds have sharpened the challenge. In 2018 and 2019, the United States imposed tariffs on Chinese goods worth hundreds of billions of dollars, citing unfair trade practices and technology transfer. China responded in kind, targeting United States exports from soybeans to machinery. The result was a sharp drop in bilateral trade, rerouted supply chains, and a new era of uncertainty for exporters and policymakers alike. These frictions, layered atop slowing growth and social demands for cleaner air and greater equity, reveal the boundaries of a model once defined by scale and speed. As China's leaders weigh the next steps, the questions now revolve not just around how to grow, but how to adapt within new ecological, demographic, and geopolitical limits. Today, China shapes the price of steel, the flow of global trade, and the fate of entire industries. Yet its growth now faces the limits of debt, demographics, and environmental strain. The world's second-largest economy remains both an engine and a question mark. In an era defined by uncertainty, understanding China's economic trajectory is not just history. It is a prerequisite for navigating the future. Share your perspective below.